What is there to say about 2024 that hasn't already been said? This was certainly an eventful year for our team at Oxford Road, for our new team at Veritone One, and certainly in the marketplace. So many things happened this year that I think changed the course of the industry that we call podcasting. But now what? There's plenty to read and look at looking back. This is an opportunity for us to look ahead today on the Media Roundtable, in service, as always, of the Chief Audio Officer, that special marketer who needs to make their advertising successful, because their ability to be successful, I think, impacts the rest of the ecosystem downstream. And we're here to serve that purpose. I'm Dan Granger. I'll be your host today. I'm the CEO of Oxford Road and Veritone One, which I don't know, maybe you guys can help me on the rebrand. If you want to throw out any names while we're having this conversation, the working title for the new business, I think, is Oxfurvatone, I think is where we're at today. I don't know. But we'll make this a good roundtable panel. Guys, we have luminaries here, real, legitimate luminaries. We have geniuses on geniuses for this look forward event. And we're going to be talking about all manner of things that matter, not just to those of us at Oxford Road and Veritone, but across the ecosystem. Let me tell you who we're joined by, just so you know who you have prognosticating today. We have Stephen Goldstein, who is the founder and CEO of Amplifi Media. Stephen, welcome back to the Media Roundtable. We're glad to have you as we're on the brink of 2025. Thanks for being here with us today again.
Happy to be here again.
And I would talk about your bio, but we'd spend the rest of the afternoon, I think, going into that. And I got the same problem with Tom Webster. I mean, another legend, luminary, who really helps us understand and make sense of the world around us in this industry. Tom, I'm very grateful as in your capacity as partner at Sounds Profitable that you are joining us today, as well as a multi-decade veteran of this field. So thank you for joining us.
If that's how you say old, Dan, thank you. I'm old.
I don't know. Well, I'm in the camp with you if that counts for anything. But I'll tell you who's not old is our fourth panel participant. I would call him Boy Wonder, but that may be too insulting. You're like right in between the pack here, Pete. But Pete Birsinger, the CEO and founder of Podscribe, who truly, I think, not only serves the industry, but I think he has been helping shape it in a number of ways that we all end up writing about and talking about later. Pete has had a profound impact on this industry, continues to do so. And I think, Pete's opinions on things are going to show up in product that we're all going to end up responding to in some way, shape, or form. So, Pete, I am glad to have you here. Whether you want to think of yourself as a new kid on the block or an old timer, you're certainly a force in this industry. So glad to have you with us as well.
Thank you. Excited to be here to learn from you sages, and congrats on all the momentum this year, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we're all doing this together. So look, none of us are shy or wanting for words to comment. So let's get straight into it. We're going to cover some of the meatier issues of this year. We're going to talk about video. Not for the first time that these folks have been talking about it, but we're going to try to look ahead at where we're going and how to adapt to that. We're going to talk about the changes in measurement, and just a lot of the major themes and trends that we're seeing. Some are exciting, some are concerning, but we're going to get into all of them. We're going to start out by doing, though, but before we get really knee deep into the qualitative and more the open discussion, we're going to start with a little round robin that we did this last year, and it gives us some relativity that we will report on in a year's time to just say, okay, are we all thumbs up or thumbs down on a few of the broader issues? Okay, and then we'll get into the unpacking as we go. And like I said, these are going to be quick, so I'm just going to call on everybody to give your, I think this is going up, I think this is going down, and if you got commentary, we're glad to have it, but we're going to save most of our thunder for the deeper issues as we go along. First question I have for you guys, and Tom, I'll start with you. When you look at 2025 as an industry, if you draw a circle around podcasting as you define it, do you believe that the consumption is going to go up or down in 2025?
I think it's probably going to go up a skosh. I'm not expecting it dramatic, and I think it really comes down to the listening that we're doing on video platforms as well. But it's going to go up a skosh.
And do you think that would be true if it were not going up on the video side, if it weren't for the video component? You think it's just organically going to go up?
I think it's going to be video driven. I think it would not be true without it because, the amount of time we spend listening to audio every day has been pretty consistent at about 4 hours a day for the last decade until you start factoring in, YouTube and all the other confounding variables.
For sure. For sure. Pete, what's your take on this one? Up or down?
Video, I'd say up and up, especially if you're drawing your circle around video and global. I mean, I think global audio, maybe Tom may know better than me, but I think it is probably rising faster than US audio. So I'd say good sized up if you account video and global audio. US, strictly audio, maybe a smidge.
We got smidges, we got
Two
dollops, we got a
smidges,
lot of
yeah.
different. Yeah, we've got some good
Skosh.
units of measurement.
Skosh,
We got
sorry.
Scotia. We're serving
Skosh.
Scotias and
Scotch and
smidges.
smidge,
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Stephen, what say you?
A wee bit. Yeah. Well, I think Tom is right. Without video in the mix, it probably doesn't grow that much, but I do think it grows. I think it's just getting a little confusing parsing it out. I do think video is bringing in new audiences, and so maybe we're going to look at this as something that actually juices the numbers quite nicely.
Okay, well, so I'm going to weigh in, and I will say that I think it'll move up at least an iota. Is going to be my prediction on this. I'm not gonna break the mold. I think we're going in the right direction, and I would underscore what Pete says. Certainly, the video thing means there's more to count, right? But on the international side, I think we're seeing a lot of global increase in consumption there as well. All right, let's talk about revenue. Steven, let's start with you on the revenue front. Do you think we're going to see more or less dollars come into this space in 2025?
I think the end of the year with the podcast election is going to have an impact on advertisers. And I think the median age screams loudly. 34 is half of what cable news, half of what talk radio is. I mean, that's pretty exciting and pretty dramatic. And advertisers, I think, chase ears and they chase eyeballs.
So does that mean you think this will be north of a smidge in terms of quantity of revenue increase, or
I
just
think
that it
we're
will be?
above. We're highly above smidge.
Okay. Tom, we'll go to you next.
I agree with Steve. I think it's going to go up. I think it's going to go up from a variety of sources, not just the CPM spot market, but other kind of revenue streams that we're going to tap into. And man, you look at some of the cable news numbers and the cable TV numbers coming out, and I think I read this week that the audience for primetime programming on MSNBC with 25 to 54 was under 100,000 for most of those shows. And like, what are we doing here? So I think we're going to start tapping into a lot more of those dollars.
And Pete,
From our perspective, definitely up. We see from our clients and people we interact with, it feels like more and more brands are entering and not a lot are really pulling out, especially as they can integrate podcasting data into their other marketing mixes. That once they're in, it is a bit of a challenge to get in, but we don't really see people pulling out. So I just see more people coming in. I think in some cases, perhaps some CPMs perhaps may decrease due to efficiencies on the ad tech serving side, which may bring revenue down a little bit. But I see, I see the net effect as positive as more brands come in and more brands see audio as essential.
I'm just going to follow the three of you again and say, yeah, it's going to go up. But here's what I'll do on the next one. I'll go first. and put a thought on the table for you guys to react to. So the third question, and Pete, you already started getting into this, are the CPMs going to go up? Is the cost of an impression or the value of an impression going to be higher or lower next year? And we're going to say this, we're going to answer this in three groups: podcasting, streaming, and radio. And so my prediction will be the CPMs will continue to increase in aggregate. In podcasting and streaming, it will decline in radio. And I think if there's anything interesting about the way I think this will go is I think this is going to get increasingly hard to split these out as the definitions and categories are shifting. And I think a lot of the radio folks are seeking ways to count their impressions in a different way. And so trying to liken those to downloads, liken those to the types of impressions we're seeing digitally, I think there's going to be an increasing amount of obfuscation. I think you're going to have to dig a little harder to know, is that a digital impression or an over-the-air impression? Because I think it's getting harder and harder to sell those over-the-air impressions for the same value. Whether or not they're worth the same value is probably another podcast discussion, but that'll be my prediction for those three. So I'll, I guess, Steve, let's go to you next. What's your take on that?
So I don't think the CPMs for podcasts go straight up. I think there's more demand, there's more competition for all of this content, which means some suppression. The streaming, I don't really have a viewpoint on. Radio is a lot more clear to me. The CPMs are already low and they are going lower. There is a lot of extra inventory and there just isn't the demand to support it.
Well, and I think there's an argument that there's a lot of direct correlation and teeter-tottering between when the old one goes down, the new ones go up, right? Because it's moving, but just to its cousins a lot of the time, right? But I don't know.
Well, and if you have a company that's doing blended audio, say iHeart, for example, you're able to move the chess pieces on the board, which I think they're quite skilled at.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And that's where I think it's going to start getting a little muddier in the months and years to come. Tom, what's your take?
I'll start with radio. I mean, I think I agree with everybody here that they're going to continue to be driven down a little bit. And Dan, you make a great point about the obfuscation. I know there's a push now to recognize 3 out of 15 minutes as a quarter hour instead of 5 out of 15 minutes. And that just seems like a race to the bottom. Streaming is a fairly efficient market. I don't see that moving a ton up or down. And I think the podcast CPM ultimately is not going to be incredibly different at the end of next year than it is right now. But that's hiding an awful lot of movement. A lot of, I don't think we're at an economically efficient market with podcast CPMs, but I think there are going to be equally as many pressures driving them up as down. And I think ultimately it's going to settle out right about where it is.
Fair enough. Pete, we're going to give you last word here.
Radio, don't know a lot about. Podcasting, I think for the top name brand shows that advertisers know work, I could see those going up because there's just not that many of them. People saw Rogan, the impact that had. Although I do think for podcasting, as programmatic becomes more of a staple for brands, and with its drastically lower streaming-ish CPMs, that may drag the average podcasting CPM down. So I'm going to say, the top shows go up, but as streaming becomes a bigger thing and, run a network or programmatic becomes a bigger thing with running networks and all that, perhaps lower tier inventory becoming more bought, I think the average may go down.
Okay, I want to go into that a little deeper with you, though, because with the moves at Spotify starting to take away some of that inventory, and if they are the largest platform right now, does that mean there's less programmatic inventory on the horizon, and will that force costs to go up?
That's a good point. I think it may eat into it, but from my perspective, I do see a number of other publishers elsewhere just working more and more to sell programmatic and they see it as a real thing that they want to grow. So hard to say, but yeah, I mean, if Spotify's really limiting the inventory, that could eat into it and give the other publishers a bit more pricing power. So we'll see.
We'll see. All right, Stephen,
Can
let's
I jump in on that
yeah,
one for
yeah,
one
please,
sec? Yeah.
please.
The mid-tier is where programmatic lives, and they need those programmatic dollars to survive. And if they can't get a steady run of programmatic revenue, I think they perish. And I think we're at that point. I mean, it is hard to levitate a smaller podcast, 25,000, 50,000 listeners without programmatic being part of the mix.
Okay, all right, fine. We got to go into this now. So, because this is, we had Cridlin on a few weeks ago, and I think he's been very, very adamant about this point and about the damage that he believes that some of these mandates can do to, that middle class that keeps coming up. And I guess the question is, why is their success dependent on programmatic? Why is it not their direct relationships with brands? It seems to me, when you like, let's go back to our radio days for a second, right? That a local radio station that sells to a national shop, their spots and dots, their remnant, they're going to get low CPMs and high frequency and all that. But if you really have a good sales team, you think about groups like the Dave Ramsey's outfit, right? The CPMs were always the highest when he just kept his inventory focused on that personal endorsement, where you can charge multiples higher on a CPM basis, and you're not dependent on things that can be served programmatically. So why do we assume that programmatic is the difference between success and failure for that middle tier?
Is Dave middle tier? I mean, that's a top 30 podcast. If we're talking about stuff that you have to go find on the charts, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Really smaller podcasts.
Smaller being that 30 to 50,000 downloads, north of 10, but not getting nobody's writing big headlines about their upfront deal that they did.
And the sales departments are lean there, and when they use a network, the networks are focused on the bigger properties.
And by the way, if you have a podcast of 10 to 50,000, you know what else you have? A day job. You don't have a sales team, I mean, that's I mean, I think Steve's exactly right about this.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there probably is a math equation to say, if you allow, if you're doing X number of shows a week, and you could value that at a market average of $20 to $30 CPM, at what point is it worth it to have its own specific representation? And so I'm going to keep going I'm going to push back on you guys a little further before I drop it. I have conversations with a lot of networks, and they'll come and they'll say, okay, you got to check out our lineup and this and that. And I'll go, that's cool. So tell me about your content thesis, or, what you guys are about. And they're like, well, we've got comedy and politics and true crime, and we're doing some experiment. I'm like, so, okay, we don't really have a common denominator that sets your network out as something that has a lane and does something exceptional. Because I think, Steve, your point on Dave Ramsey is a fair one to say, yeah, but you're cherry picking one of the top nationally syndicated hosts. You're talking about the long tail here that are dependent on this. But I would argue that if you're a network, yes, as an individual creator, you're not going to have a dedicated salesperson for 40,000 impressions once a week, for sure. But if you had a publisher that was focused on a lane, and you still do have some of those, and they had a roster of shows that may be that second tier, and you had dedicated salespeople advocating for things that make sense for that lane, a business network that is managed by somebody that reaches advertisers that want to do B2B, that can build those relationships across that network, I actually think your yield will be higher. I think you would get a higher CPM. That may not scale because we don't have that type of infrastructure. Everybody's doing something random, or you have small players fending for themselves. But I do think there's a more organized future where The programmatic is less important, and the direct advertiser relationship is important. But it would require, I do think, more focus and similarity between shows carried by a network and identities that most of them just don't have. My view as a buyer, that's part of what's choking the industry and not allowing it to thrive, is that there's too many networks that are too hard to define and buy in bulk. But anyway, any final thoughts on this topic? This is a good one.
I guess there's just a number where you define middle class, where they might not even have a network. So I guess it's whatever your number is.
And those are the ones that probably need the network the most, would be my opinion, right?
We just finished, we did the final project with my NYU class, and we go through this 2.5 week thing called PodQuest, where they have to build a business plan for a podcast.
That's so awesome.
And when I gave them the CPM model, and they started doing the math, okay, if I do 4 commercials and I have 20,000 listeners, wow, I'm going to make $4,000 an episode. That's when you realize you're in trouble. And Tom is right. You have a day job at that point. You don't have a successful podcast.
Yeah. Important topic. All right, let's go to the next one. I'm going back to you, Stephen, because you know as much as anybody about the investment into content. Do you believe that there's going to be more or less money spent on content in 2025?
So you're talking about big deals in purchasing content?
I think it's probably, well, yes, that's definitely part of it. But it's all a function of just budget allocated to shows, right? So that could be production or it could be talent deals. I think it's just the money that we spend to manufacture.
So I think we're going to see a cooling of those big name deals. I think that there may be a few. I think there may be a couple of companies that align with bigger companies. I certainly think that's going to happen in the next few months. But I sort of feel like we're at an inflection point here where the math doesn't naturally work for these super giant box office Marvel comic level things. This business feels a little different than that in the long term. And then I look at what SiriusXM is going through, where they're trying to figure out who they want to be, for example, and they've done a couple of big deals, and then they recently announced they're done with the big deals.
So is that a vote for down?
Is
that a neutral?
I don't know that it's down. I just don't think it's up.
So maybe we'll call that a flat vote. I'm going to vote. I'll jump in and vote up, because I think just simply because Spotify's making people think they need to do video, you're going to have more people spending more money to produce. But I think, to your point, I think we've all kind of seen the talent deals, and I think there's two kinds of talent deals. There's the irrational ones that are actually rational because the publisher needed the headline and needs a marquee asset, even if it's a loss leader. And then 2, there's the ones that they already modeled and they know they're going to make money. Right. Everything besides that, I think we all know is over. But Tom, I'll give you next word on this one.
I think it's all going to go up, and I think it's going to go up from new sources and new places. And I think Steve touched on something that's really important right now, and that is, where are the blockbusters? Period. Right? Marvel has kind of collapsed. The new Sony Marvel universe, or it's not the MCU, but Craven was terrible, right? I mean, the DC movies have kind of collapsed. I mean, there's all kinds of reboots, but where is the safe bet? Where would you slide a big pile of chips? And if there is nowhere to slide a big pile of chips, then there may be more chips spread around lower investment things like podcasting, which may in turn see some increases in the types of content investments that are made. I don't know about deals, but in terms of people experimenting more with the medium, you look at how far ahead Joe Rogan still is in terms of audience, and that's a cry for help. Like, there's got to be some stuff in between that gets slotted in there, and I think people are going to start to invest in that.
Interesting. Pete, what do you say?
I think up. I think more production. I think it hasn't really caught up with the demand for audio. I think, though, of the money coming in, a larger percent will be to video as well. And yeah, also, like you're saying, Dan, it's just a little more expensive than audio, plus inflation. So
plus that. Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting. And it's gonna, I mean, I don't know. It seems like I'm really curious to see how long Spotify holds their policy that they just announced, or if that's something that changes by summertime or, or this time next year. But I have a feeling it's going to impact production costs, right? So we'll see. We'll see. All right. We have a couple more, but I want to consolidate here. I think we're moving into the bigger topics, and I think one topic that probably deserves to stay big, regardless of where the news cycle is on it, is AI. And one of the things we asked a year ago is whether or not we thought AI would do more harm than good or good than harm in our business in the coming year. So I want to go back to that question. And Pete, I'll start with you. Do you believe AI is going to do more harm or good, and why in 2025?
I think there may be some short-term pain as people's, maybe who AI might be replacing some of their work. But I do think long-term good for the efficiencies created and the additional leverage it provides, advertisers, people who are making shows. So I think there will be some short-term adjustments needed, but long-term, I think overall it'll be better for listeners, advertisers, and I think the creators who leverage it and leverage it well, it will be good for them. And I think the rest will, I think it'll be necessary to incorporate it.
And is there anywhere else that you would call out that you think it's going to be the most used as you're thinking about it?
I naturally think a lot on the ad side of things.
Yeah.
So I just, for better or worse, I just don't see how a growing percent of ads will be AI generated. I think in a lot of other mediums they already are. Perhaps in a lot of cases that makes the cost approachable enough for more advertisers to get into the space. If they don't need to get the host, or it's just easier, a lower barrier to entry to produce the ads. I'd say from our perspective, we're looking at ways where we can use AI in a more direct way to recommend which shows and which impressions are best. So I think that will come into play probably more next year.
Tom, how about you?
Well, AI doesn't kill people. People kill people, Dan. So I don't know if AI is going to do more harm than good. I guess the question is, what are the actors in our space going to do with it?
Will it be used more? Yeah.
Will it be used more? Yeah. So I'm gonna just point out two things where I think it's going to help. Ultimately, I think one is something I know, Dan, you're very concerned about brand suitability, and you talk about civility scores. We talk about GARM going away, and I have to think AI can play a role here to continue to remove objections or continue to improve the effectiveness of what we do. Second thing, and this is a pet peeve, drives me up a wall when I listen to a podcast. I'll just pick one out because it's a big target. The Bill Simmons podcast, right? Bill Simmons podcast uses uses the AI host read inserted ads that are not refreshed often enough. And there's almost nothing worse than a host read ad that's not refreshed because it's quirky and it stands out even more. And if AI can help us refresh creative more often and really tailor offerings and more time-sensitive offerings and things like that, then that I think could unlock a lot more in terms of effectiveness, which would help to drive revenue. So I'm going to say good.
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you on the opportunity for brand safety. It's tricky because I still don't think that the marketplace has a clear idea or agreement around what is worth calling safe versus unsafe. And so how, the sophistication of the tool won't matter till we can agree on what's worth measuring and how to treat it, right? But beyond that, I do think that it's going to make a world of difference as it can pull out irony, humor, things like that. I think it's gonna make that a lot easier for sure. Steven, what say you?
So I think it depends on what we're talking about. If we're talking about actual content, I think it's a really bad idea. I think the Notebook LM thing, which is ridiculously impressive. I mean, it's scary how good it is, and it's going to get better, is not a solution for podcasts or podcasters, and it fights against authenticity and all of that. But if we're talking about plumbing, and I don't mean that pejoratively, I mean fixing some of these things that take time with limited staff, I think it's fantastic. I also think things like recommendation engines are going to improve dramatically, and that will be beneficial to podcasters. Yeah, I don't think we've seen it anywhere yet, although I'm starting to feel it on Netflix. I feel like their algorithms are better at predicting things than it used to be. So I think things like that are going to get better over time. There'll be more efficiencies, there'll be more experimentation. But on the content side, there will be more abuse, no question about it. But I doubt that there will be giant success.
And I'm gonna pile on and agree with everybody that I think we're gonna be in the good column on this for a while, because I don't think anybody's making enough money to invite the scrutiny that would pull out the bad stuff. But I think we're still in the, I know, Stephen, you've got great ways of talking about what age we are in. We're in the one, however you end up defining it later, where you go, hey, did you see that cool new thing it can do? And I think we're in a bit of a honeymoon period with the features that it's able to unlock for us. But, and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but I think it bears repeating. The part of this that I want to keep live in the conversation so it doesn't hurt us later is, what I would call the hold your we for a we moment. Do you guys remember that in radio? Right. And we talked about this. The San Diego Zoo crew doing a dumb contest, and they had somebody not going to the bathroom to win a Wii and to set a record, and then they died. As a consequence of that, people started going, oh, maybe we need to rethink what limits we put on the types of contests and promotions that we do. Wait till they see the impact of AI on things like that when it is unchecked. When somebody doesn't consider the human impact of something that we thought we were just being clever or efficient with, but it went and created something that had a real world sudden negative consequence, especially in matters of life or death. We don't get to decide when that happens, but we know it's going to happen. And when it happens, when the Waymo runs over somebody on your block, all of a sudden that is a whole different type of conversation. I think we're going to see that here, especially in the world of open communication that is, limitless in its scale. At least with a video, you have limitations on what you can, edit together in an episode. But now these things could go in a million directions we can't even conceive of. So I feel like there's going to be a backlash. I think the wrong thing has to happen at the wrong place at the right time. That time's people making money with the use of it. And we're going to have a big scandal in this industry, and we're going to have to react to that with some form of policy or regulation. Until then, we're having a lot of fun.
I think every industry goes through this. My wife's an attorney, and within the past year, there was a case that went before a judge, and there were sightings that were created by an AI model, hallucinating evidently, because it brought up cases that didn't exist. The judge figured out that these were fake cases. The attorney who brought it did not check his own work and was disbarred. The case was thrown out, and every law firm in the country now understands guardrails. So you're right. We may end up there too.
Well,
It's
look at it this
happen.
way.
Yeah.
Orson Welles once fooled the whole world that we were being, invaded by aliens with a kazoo and a pair of coconuts and a microphone. So with all of the image and sound and news fakery that is possible, it could get much, much worse.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And it's just a question of who's holding the bag when it happens, right?
There had to have been horses, Steve. I think some of the aliens came on horses.
Yeah,
I don't know. I wasn't alive then. So.
Pete, did you have something on this?
One thing you made me think of when you were saying that is we've been asked a couple times with our advertisers before if we can check to see if an ad read is faked, read by AI, not actually by the host. So that might be, one area where it might come up, so-and-so is using AI for their reads. They weren't actually in there in the studio recording. So I think that's one area. And the hallucination thing is pretty rampant. We had a tool, a host controversy tool out there for a little bit. We discontinued it. Maybe we'll bring it back, but we were testing it out with actually, Bard Google's thing. And we'd ask, is there anything controversial about this host because Google had like more recent news. And what we found is it would hallucinate terribly, and you were kind of priming it for controversial, and it had like the same hallucination for dozens of hosts, where it said, in like high school they dressed up in an Indian headdress and
Oh, wow.
yeah, this cultural misappropriation. And then I was like, okay, we changed the prompt and said you have to include links for everything, and then every link I probably checked 50 links, not a single one was ever real. So then we eventually started tailoring it to saying, instead of was there a controversial issue with this host, just how is their reputation, positive or negative, not priming it. So it was, I imagine that things have gotten a little bit better since then, but the hallucination was quite rampant, at least a year ago, for that specific use case.
We'll see where this one goes. All right. Well, now we're getting into deeper waters. So let's keep going. Let's take a step deeper, shall we? We'll go waist deep into the video conversation. So first, Stephen, you're our you teach the class, right? How do you explain to a group of students what has happened in 2024 with respect to video and podcasting? Then we can open it up to the 2025 predictions. But I'd love for you to frame this one for us.
Yeah, let's go in reverse, because Gen Z is what's driving this. And it's their use of YouTube and their different use of Spotify, I believe, that's causing Spotify to have YouTube envy. I mean, let's face it, Spotify wants to be YouTube, and they're afraid that they're going to miss this video surge, and so they are trying to deal with it. I blew out one of the classes, and we just did a complete focus group, because here I have these 30 Gen Zers, and they've been with me for 14 weeks, and we talk about a lot of different things. And I said, I want you to talk to me about how you're making your choices. And it was fascinating and interesting. They use Spotify for audio. Many of them are not even aware that there's video music capabilities on Spotify, because that's just not how they use it. And they use YouTube for video, and they greatly appreciate the UI, that it's simple, easy to navigate, intuitive. It is where they go for not video, they go there for content. And so I think Spotify is up against that monster. I think we're all up against that monster. I mean, today, the number one video network is not Netflix, and it's not combining all the NBC and Peacock and, CNBC and MSNBC channels. YouTube is the number one video network, and it's owned by the number one search engine. And so now podcasts are going to live inside this search engine. I think we haven't really explored how chaotic that's going to be. But right now, that is where they all go to find content. So when we had the discussion about Spotify selecting some bigger videos and wanting to feature them in Spotify, it sort of was, I got to say, it was a yawn. It was nothing more or less, like, okay, whatever they want to do. But that doesn't change where they're going to find their content. But they do use Spotify for audio all the time. They do use YouTube for video and/or audio all the time. And sometimes they watch a podcast, and sometimes they listen to the same podcast. Emma Chamberlain does exceedingly well with 18 to 24-year-olds, exceedingly well in podcast form, and not so well in video form. Why doesn't it do well in video? Because she's lying in her bed talking to people, and they don't care to watch that. And so they love her, but they don't appreciate the video. I thought that was fascinating.
Interesting. And so from there, where does it go from here? What happens in 2025?
So I think you're going to see the war has begun. I think everybody is going to be screaming for share here. I don't think Spotify is going to have an easy run of it, based on the feedback that I've gotten from this crew and my own intuitive notion that people don't change habits instantly until they figure out what's better what's in it for them. WIIFM, the world's largest radio station. They need to understand why they should change their content discovery. And we'll see whether Spotify is capable of doing that.
Well, and what do they have to lose if they're not successful? Like, what's the trade that they're making in this new policy?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I've thought about what if I were sitting there, and I think I might end up doing the same thing, saying, all right, if the world is moving more to video and our job is to create an ongoing relationship with an audience, a demographic group, then yes, I might. But that doesn't mean it's going to be successful.
Very good. All right, Pete, let's go to you next. Where are we going in video next year?
Well, video, yeah, it's obviously huge right now. And we put out a stat in our last performance benchmark report on the growth of simulcast. So not only do listeners love it, but advertisers do too. I think it was over 80, maybe even over 90% of the advertiser campaigns we tracked of those advertisers that had simulcast campaigns. So advertisers are buying it. And of the simulcast campaigns we tracked, I think it was maybe close to 2/3 of the impressions on them, typically on average, were on YouTube. So tons of advertisers are buying it. And of those simulcast campaigns, a lot of the lion's share of the impressions are coming on YouTube. But I think the big obstacle and the thing that is really holding views back or video back is it's tough for advertisers to track. We model the performance now, but it's not exactly the same as actually tracking and doing the measurement, which we can do on the audio impressions. So YouTube is a real black box. Spotify for video is starting out that way. We'll see if measurement is allowed there for their views, but I do think that could be a massive way for Spotify to get an upper hand on YouTube from the advertiser perspective is if they allow actual measurement that advertisers crave on the video buys. Because with YouTube right now, it's you would know perhaps better than me, Dan, but it really seems like it's the lack of measurement always seems to come up as near the top item.
It's the biggest issue.
Buys.
There's complete confusion, but while, and I'm interested just to go a little deeper with you on this, Pete, just because this is so relevant to your business, right? What's the biggest bottleneck? What do advertisers want to talk about more than anything else? They want to talk about attribution. How do you know where your leads are coming from, where your customers are coming from? More popular than anything else we can put on the table about the channel. Their favorite podcasters, they don't care. Advertisers want to know about measurement. When they go to YouTube, like you said, it's a black box, and you've got the level of sophistication that Google allows for an advertiser to measure the effectiveness of its ad seems to be, well, did you put a link in the show description and then remind the viewer to click that link for proper credit, and then make some random assumption about how many people signed up without following those instructions? Like, that's your primary attribution methodology, right? And then secondarily, you could have a survey, or a media mix model. But I mean, Pete, what is the best attribution that is known to man so far? Is there anything beyond that people are using effectively when they're buying YouTube?
Those are probably the top two. We will model the performance on YouTube from the exact audio ad and exact audio episode that we see there. But, I'd say all three in conjunction are the most common that we see. But, Spotify, it could be different, and maybe they don't have the tech yet, but I'm sure I think they're thinking about it internally, whether they want to allow more sophisticated tracking. So yeah, we'll see, because YouTube, it's tough out there for advertisers.
Well, before Tom, I'm going to tee you up in a second here, but I just want to I want to say this out loud again, because I think it bears repeating and spelling out. We work in an industry that has where the most consumption happens on YouTube and the second most happens on Spotify today. And both of those leading platforms have said, no, you are not going to just use this as an audio channel. You must do video, except the difference is on YouTube, at least I can have a static image and they'll take it. And on Spotify, if there's no motion, there's no audio. You don't get in if there's no video. And then the cherry on top isn't just that they've made the two leading platforms have issued that requirement. They also said, and you have no mechanism to measure the performance and no mechanism to validate the way that consumers are even listening to it, let alone responding to your ads. So in the age of information and AI, we have basically been informed by the two leading distributors that we cannot measure the outcome of the thing that is for sale in ways that we were able to do before. Is that is that correct? Am I even saying that right? Because it seems kind of crazy.
Yeah, and I think for Spotify, if I had to guess, I might go optimistic and think there's a 60% chance they might allow it in the next year or two. Maybe that's optimistic. For YouTube, I think Google is just making so much money with the AdSense, and they just think, nah, we don't want to, mess with this or, do other things. I think it's much more of an afterthought for them there. So don't foresee that really changing. But Spotify, maybe.
It's just kind of crazy that this is these are the actual facts in the situation. So Tom, with that, I'd love to hear you make sense out of this for us.
That's a tall order. I do think that YouTube in particular is going to continue to take platform share. And I wonder if we're not focused on the wrong thing here. I mean, yeah, video is really, really important, but I think we're also not giving enough credence to YouTube as just a better platform, as a better app to find and consume content. And I'll tell you the stat. I don't often get surprised by stats because I do a lot of survey work. The one that surprised me the most this year was one that we just put out in Video's Rise in Podcasting. And it was a look at audio primes, people who self-report that 75% or more of the podcasts they consume are audio, right? Now, we can quibble about self-reported percentages, but if someone says more than 75, they're acknowledging that audio is more important to them than video. I think we can agree on that. And their number one discovery platform for finding their latest new podcast was YouTube. 48% said YouTube. So these are people that are telling us, no, we listen to mostly audio, but we find our new content on YouTube. And I look at that, and it's a cry for help for RSS-based audio podcast clients, and frankly, their failure to innovate. And I look at why people might go to YouTube. I talked to a reporter today from NBC who wanted to ask me about podcasts being the new talk show. And here's the thing about a podcast on YouTube. It is not a talking head talking at you. There's comments, there's chat, there's community. There's the opportunity to believe you are being seen. There's the opportunity to believe you are being heard. And that is not something that audio podcast apps give you. And when you search for something on YouTube, if you search for that Rogan Trump interview, your search results are going to come back 100% accurate right at the very top. And you're going to see a picture of Rogan and Trump. You're not going to see a piece of podcast cover art, right? You're going to see exactly what it is that you wanted to go for. You're going to be able to skip exactly where you want it to go in the interview where you want to. All of these things. And I think if this is an existential threat for open RSS, it's going to be because the podcast clients innovated for creators perhaps, but did not innovate enough for the user and the user experience. And that's what YouTube is nailing. And I'm not saying the video is not an integral and probably the dominant part of that, but it's also just a really good experience. And that's why I think they're going to continue to take share in a vacuum without anybody else really attempting to do that. And it's, I'll stop there. I have other thoughts, but.
Well, I mean, those are very important thoughts. And I think you're right. I mean, I think we would all acknowledge that YouTube is one on discovery, right? Like above everything else, it's the ease, it's the functionality. It's, like ease of use in most consumer surveys trumps every other value for a product, right? Don't make me think, how can I push less buttons to get the thing what I want? And I agree with you completely. The video may be a distraction from what are the core issues that have yet to be solved. I'll tell you a quick story about my origins in this business. So I was selling radio for 10 years, starting in 2003. In 2006, when podcasts started happening, I had a chance to go to New York and get time in front of the CEO and CFO of Clear Channel at that time, the Mays brothers. And I had never been in the room with them before. I was just a local seller, right? But I was going to be at this awards ceremony, and I thought, okay, I need to make this count, that I'm going to be in the room with these guys. And somebody took a picture of me doing this. I pitched them a proposal called Talk Radio 2.0 in 2006. And I said, guys, Pandora, podcasts, if we can put these together, we'll win the future, right? Because this is where it's going. And their response was, oh, great idea, sounds cool. Talk to this guy over here. Guy over here says, oh, we're already doing all that. We're working on it, right? But what it makes me think is that 18 years later, its time may actually have come, in that we really need a simple platform that actually prioritizes the audio experience first, and because you can't unlock what audio is about to be able to do through AI if you're limited with video, right? Somebody has to say we are about audio and audio's future and its potential, to where a listener can very easily sample and say they want more of this thing and less of that thing. Whether that's through voice prompts, thumbs up, thumbs down, I don't know, but it feels like the time is now for somebody to say, hey, everybody's zigging and chasing video. I'm going to zag and double down on being the audio platform for the future, whether videos are welcome there or not.
Maybe it's timing, but the graveyard is loaded with those audio only apps. And I believe that the reason Spotify is making their move is because they do see the failure or potential failure of their whole platform if they aren't wider in scope.
But did they really try? I mean, I get why you can't come in as a startup and get everybody to do that, but Spotify could have, and I don't know that I saw them give a fair shot to audio discovery. Do you feel like anybody that was in a position to win it actually went there?
So just going back to my NYU focus group, they do not like the Spotify UI compared to the YouTube UI. Tom was just talking about that. There is a huge difference.
So right now for discovery, it sounds like you have YouTube and to some extent TikTok that are winning that on behalf of this whole industry, right? And if you're not trying to change what's there, but just respond to what's there, it seems like if you're trying to promote, you need to be promoting on one of those platforms. And then where your kind of home base is, there are a lot of different options. But do you guys not see a call here to a greater opportunity for somebody to just actually focus themselves on audio?
I do. I mean, I get what Steve is saying, and maybe it is timing, maybe it's not timing. It's really hard to change people's behavior, right?
Yeah.
And I think there needs to be a movement that precedes that, to be honest. I think what needs to precede it is I think this industry needs to talk about audio more. And I think this industry needs to sell the benefits of audio and how audio lets you consume your favorite show while you're driving, while you're taking a walk, doing whatever you're doing, how it's a companion, how it's with you all the time. I don't think we sell the benefits of podcasting very well as an industry. And I think if we do that, if we prime people that audio is something different, and we know it's something different, and we know we can drive better CPMs if we have people's attention and we have better effectiveness and things like that, then we could take that next step. But it's hard to change two behaviors at once. And I really think we need to do a better job talking about audio.
Well, and so that it's so interesting, because especially for us, we're going through a merger and we're looking at all of our communications and, looking in the mirror and going, who are we? What are we? Are we the thing we said, in the past? Does this make sense in the future? And just having a moment to reflect and evaluate that, right? How sick are you guys of the what's a podcast conversation? Do you feel like it's been settled? Do you feel like we need to continue to have it to even determine if audio and podcasting need to be synonymous?
It's settled in my mind. It comes from the podcast region of France. and anything else is just sparkling audio.
I think we're smack in the middle of it, depending.
So we're not out of it yet, in your view.
No, but I don't think that we should be on our heels. Tom is absolutely right. People use audio for a reason, and there's a portability and there's a use case, whether it's cooking dinner or driving in the car. I think we have a lot of really great characteristics that are not replaced by video at all. What consumers are interested in is the flexibility. Let me make the decision about whether I'm going to use this show today as audio or video. As my 26-year-old reminds me all the time, I will come in and take a look at who is being interviewed, and I will not necessarily watch it. I just want a video reference point. I think that's done a lot.
Have you ever heard of any of these companies? Shopify, Bayer, Oracle, Indeed, Masterclass, Babbel, Tommy John, LegalZoom, Constant Contact. We could go on, and we could go on so much further now that we're joining forces with our friends at Veritone One. We have created the world's largest specialist agency in audio and in podcasting. Nobody's ever done anything like this before, and it's an exciting opportunity for everybody involved. What we do at this agency is we offer comprehensive services for brands that are looking to break out and be successful in this space. We call you the chief audio officer because we believe that what you need requires real specialist work. And the way that we approach it includes proprietary methods in media planning and buying, analytics and attribution, insights. We have a proprietary process called Audiolytics, which is our trademark method for creative development that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. Audio isn't just the work that we do, it truly is our passion, and we aim to elevate this industry to new heights. And that's why we're the leaders in brand safety and suitability, as well as in volume in the space. We try to provide solutions that ensure that your ad buys align your values that you have as a brand with your business metrics that you need to be successful. This stuff is hard, but we're here to make it a little bit easier for you. And if you're a chief audio officer seeking best in market performance at maximum viable scale, please get in touch with us. Do the right thing. Go to oxfordroad.com. And if you're passionate about audio, if you're strategic, if you're relentless, and you're looking for a career change, consider joining our mission as an agent of influence. Send us your resume through our website, oxfordroad.com. We made it really easy to spell. Sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer, and be sure to mention that you heard about us right here on the Media Roundtable podcast, because attribution is important. Thanks, everybody.
One thing that the what is a podcast conversation is interesting about, and if we talk about dearth of tools and technology, is most podcast publishers, or many of them, they have this problem where they're selling a simulcast and they need to tell the advertiser how many audio downloads their ad had and how many YouTube views, and then also now Spotify. So how a lot of them, and how that's historically been solved, is interns or whoever putting that data onto a spreadsheet for a campaign and reporting that there. So I think that that question has still, we can help with that to a degree, but I think that opens the door tremendously, I think, to an even perhaps easier tool to build, because I think building for an industry, building for consumers and changing millions of them in their behavior is so tough. But I think for reporting for publishers, and also even publishing for publishers, to what do you have to do now to publish across everywhere? How many different sites and things do you have to open? So I think also on that side, it's tough. But I guess as you might say, Tom, the things with RSS and podcasting, maybe it's been overdeveloped for the publisher or the creator, and not enough for the listener. So maybe it's time for the listener to get some tech improvements, but there's definitely more that could be built on the creator side.
Okay, I want to fold in the measurement topic to this a little bit, and Tom, I want to put you on the spot for this one, just as a researcher, on someone that really understands polling science. You know, it's so interesting to have you and Pete side by side on my screen here, because I think, you know, Pete, your way represents what I think the modern marketer thinks is the full scope of how you get information. You use pixels, you have digital means of tracking an event and correlating, you know, inputs to outputs, right? Through something that's seen and measurable. But Tom, you come from a world where you have to ask people what they do. And I think a lot of marketers, you know, I'm Gen X, so I kind of feel like I get to see a little, I get to understand both perspectives on this, but I feel like a lot of newer marketing thought has dismissed this. It has given up on the idea that actually the most accurate information may be from continuing to talk to your, you know, samples of an audience rather than trying to sample them with something that they're not even aware is being sampled. And I wonder if the future of our ability to measure whether it's audience or action as a result of hearing an ad, is it possible that the future is actually more about surveying properly than it is about trying to get some fancy digital silver bullet?
Well, I think the mistaken assumption, if anyone has it, is that either way is accurate completely, right? There's limitations to digital data where where you believe you're getting the census, but you're not necessarily sure who's on the other side of the screen. You see that especially in things like sentiment analysis, right? Like sentiment analysis is still the kind of thing that I would rather pick a completely random sample of 2,000 things with an intern and a pencil rather than look at what what an AI tells me if it's positive or negative. That said, I think the solution is always going to be a hybrid system. I think one has to calibrate the other, one has to help inform the other. Unfortunately, things like the elections have gotten people very heated about polling, and they kind of don't want to hear that the polling was actually really, really good in the last election. It's the electoral college you want to talk to. But neither one is perfect. Neither are going to give you complete information. Having both in your toolkit, why would you say no to that? Polling is actually only getting better in some ways, and I know that the tools that Pete is working on are only getting better. So why would you tie one hand behind your back?
Well, do you think that the marketplace knows that?
No, and I brought up the election on purpose because I do
Which
think
is why
that
I'm
that is
pushing. And by the way, I
yeah,
know Pete knows that, so
yep.
we can be picking on Pete for representing the digital side. But this is something that you know that I think some of us know, but I don't know if the market knows because they just think if it's not digital, it doesn't exist. If I don't have that pixel tracking, it doesn't exist.
No, and that's not a battle that I can fight single-handedly. But when you do things the right way and you do them over and over, you tend to see the same things over and over, and that tells you you're doing a pretty good job. Or, both polling and digital measurements, I think, continue to get better. But you are absolutely right that the market research industry, the survey side of things, has taken some black eyes, and I don't know that they're all completely justified.
Stephen, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's harder than ever to aggregate all of this data. And I think a lot about television because I think they're ahead of us on this. NBC, for example, has seen their linear channels get murdered. Who's watching the 11 o'clock news and who's watching primetime TV shows? But they were smart enough to develop an app and develop Peacock, and they have all sorts of other opportunities to connect with people on video. SNL does about 4 million viewers per episode, runs up and down depending on how big the guest is, but about 4 million. And then depending on who the guest is and the content, they'll do another 20 million views on YouTube. So YouTube, which was the enemy, is now a profit center for NBC. And I was listening to an interview with Seth Meyers, And the question was, are you annoyed that people are taking your show and chopping it up? And he said, no, because if they weren't chopping it up, I'd be out of business. They're not watching my show at 12:30 at night. And so there is, it's like the DVD was to the movie companies. Ah, the DVD's going to kill us. And it turned out to be, Blockbuster and Netflix and everything else. I think we're sort of in the middle of this now. We're behind television, but we are sort of in the middle of this now where we have to figure out how to aggregate all this stuff. And Pete, good luck with that. It's going to be hard, but necessary.
Well, Pete, I started this topic pushing on polling science and in favor of that versus over reliance on digital. So I'll give you last word.
Well, triangulation is a hot word, and I think it's going to be getting even hotter where you use multiple sources. It is funny, and I've definitely noticed this, that people have definitely a bias where they like firm, precise, fast numbers, even if they're not the most accurate. And we've encountered this where we roll out incrementality and we say, oh, there's maybe a range of 60 to 80% lift, and they're like, but what's the exact number? And the truth is, there's no exact number, but attribution masks that. Digital attribution masks that to a degree and says, you got 12.7 conversions, and here's exactly when they arrived and the exact division of credit. And people, for better or worse, are drawn to that. And from what we see, a lot of decisions are made on that. And perhaps it's the convenience of being able to incorporate it from multiple channels into one brand's big internal MTA or MMM. And then, you crunch all this data and you get one thing. And the ease of combining the data in the digital style way, it may not necessarily be the best or the most accurate, but it is, for many brands that I see, almost the only way to get in and be a sustainable channel, just because it's just sort of how their systems work. And if that's how their systems work, although it's imperfect, it's sort of in some ways the road to progress. But I think in a lot of cases, particularly as video rises, other methods to put a check on these systems, like, is it really driving this much? A check to make sure they're not so out of whack is definitely essential.
Checks and balances. Yeah. Well, I think, the note to the chief audio officer in that is that if you think that your digital framework is going to be the best solution you can have, you might be missing half of it. And if you're still on surveys only, you might be missing a couple tricks there as well. I will tell you, just very tactically, when we're working with brands, our measurement, like what becomes, yes, we want to triangulate. Yes, we want redundant measurement practices and to be able to see alignment and sources of truth. But like, you can't begin if your goal is to actually know what happened for your return on ad spend. You shouldn't do streaming if you can't pixel, because surveys will generally fail you. Podcast, you could actually make it work most of the time with pixels or with survey. And radio, you can't use radio if you don't have proper survey instrumentation, which means everybody you hear on the radio lives in one of two worlds. One where they don't know or care if there's an impact for the money that they're spending on those ads, or two, they probably have a really good survey system and practice in place. And it's amazing how many people could still be successful on radio today if only they'd take the time to survey.
And gotta love that 3 minutes equal 15 now. That's
A
really
quarter
good
hour.
data.
Did they get to call it a QH?
That dates all the way back to television. I'm sorry, audio in the 1950s when there were 15-minute shows, right? And that's a system that's been in place. I was chairman of the Arbitron Advisory Council twice.
Wow.
And we went, as we were putting PPM into the marketplace, we went to the radio business and said, hey, this thing can do minute by minute ratings. We should move to the future. And collectively, they all barfed on it and said, oh, no. We don't want people to know what's really going on. We'll continue with the 5 equal 15. and now we're going to go to 3 = 15. Wow.
What is?
Podcasts are looking real good.
Yeah, exactly. So wait a minute. They're going to be putting podcasts in that as well.
No. I'm
Oh,
saying
but
that
that would be
podcast
interesting if
measurement
they
is far better.
normalized them, though, right? If you could do it across, that would be interesting to have an apples to apples comparison. But
You know,
we're not there yet.
if someone would only leak those minute by minute ratings for a big radio station, it would be like the leak of the Zapruder film. The whole industry would go, oh, wait, no one, everyone changed the channel? What's going on?
Okay, so we're coming to the end here, and we're gonna do a round robin where I ask you to check your pockets for any final predictions for 2025. But before we do that, I want to bring out the last big one, which is I heard there was a presidential election this year. And I heard that podcasts may or may not have played a role. What we know is that Trump went on more podcasts and his team did than Kamala. We know that he won the popular vote. This was a big event, and enough that people are calling it the podcast election. I don't know. I feel like it. Knowing what I know about podcasts, I know it helped him, given the impact of the shows that he and his team went on. But I also feel like, it's like the Kennedy Nixon thing where they blame it all on the sweat and the debate. And it's like, yeah, but you could have picked a billion other small variables that would have also made an equal impact, right? So was it all Joe Rogan? Who knows? But we like to take credit for it because it certainly makes us feel more powerful. But question to you guys is, whatever the reality of the situation is, what's the impact going forward? So what? This is the podcast election. So what?
I think it's great. I think it's wonderful. I think it puts a spotlight on podcasting in a way that we never could have imagined. I also think about it in relation to other media. I mean, look, TikTok is a scrolling media. We call it TikTok brain now. People are just scrolling their brains out, and 96% of the content is past. And we're in this era of short form content, and yet podcasts are 20 minutes, they're an hour, they're an hour and a half. I mean, this is really counterintuitive to everything that's going on in culture. And people were interested in listening to some of the politicians. But I can also assure you that generationally, no one knows who David Muir is. And so they went somewhere where they could actually find some information about the candidates, and it was being served up on podcasts.
Yeah, I think I worked on the exit polls and the vote count research for almost 20 years, and I think two things. Number one, the impact of podcasting on this election has been overstated, especially when you look at how the electorate really turned out. I think it was, that some Democrats didn't vote that should have or could have or did vote for Biden, right? But that said, I think the true impact of the podcast election is, 20 years ago, if you were a politician, you wanted to get on Don Imus or you wanted to get on Howard Stern, and 10 years ago, you wanted to get on, Morning Joe or things like that. And now I think you're going to see people want to get on podcasts, and they're going to be a lot more of those opportunities. It's going to become much more of the zeitgeist of the political chattering class, and ultimately that may in turn lead to something that actually is legitimately a podcast election, as podcasting becomes a much bigger slice of how politicians get their words out.
Interesting. Well, so the Whistle Stop tour now squarely includes podcasting in the same way that, social media in 2008, Obama did a lot to legitimize it, right? And maybe in some ways we're seeing some of that here as well.
I don't think we should forget, though, if you look at the top 50 podcasts,
yeah,
only 5 or 6 of them are news-based.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other stuff, interesting stuff going on out there. I say this to my radio friends all the time who run conservative talk stations. There's a lot of other talk to be had and to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing on that note, Stephen, I think audio only, maybe not so many news, but we were maybe with video too. I think we're putting out a new ranker. And I was struck by when you sort it with simulcast views as well, the number that did seem to rise to the top that really were political. So maybe it depends how you look at it. And I guess who really knows what the impact was? Maybe it's easy to look back and say this, but I think the effect will be next time people are going to really push to get on podcasts, as you're saying, Dan.
Oh, for sure. Well, it's a great statement about the influence of podcasts. I mean, I think this is probably in the same sentence as Serial in terms of just what it's doing for the buzz and notoriety of the channel. Some of the stuff I'm looking at with this is, I mean, the cultural shift that's happened as a result of this. I don't know if it's just because half the country is like, I give up, forget it at this point. But I mean, look at the change between the world we were operating in 24 months ago and today, where an advertiser, nobody was going to touch Twitter or X. Nobody was going to go near that. A lot of advertisers would not go near Rogan because of his associations. Okay. Donald Trump, nobody wanted to speak his name unless it was to renounce him. And now you have Tim Cook and Jeff Bezos, and everyone is lining up to kiss the ring. And basically, my prediction is that Elon's going to be the first trillionaire because of his ties to this administration. So, like, I think things are changing fast. And I think that in the world of brand safety, you're going to see real implications in that. Honestly, I think brands feel like they don't even know where to begin with it. But I also think that there's an opportunity for us to do something that makes sense now. We're going to keep pushing the civility score with the people that we work with. We feel like it's the best. They're all broken solutions, but it's the most practical that we've seen to try to deal with, what was a lot of polarization. But, I think that people seeing this, I am seeing advertisers that before were more avoidant now going, yeah, we can take off some of those restrictions. And I hope that that's not just going to lead to more, better, like more effective capitalism, but also that it lowers the temperatures a little bit as we're not in our silos going, well, if you're not on our side, then we can't do business. I think us doing business together should open up more common understanding. I don't know if it'll work that way. That's why we're pushing on the brand safety front. Anyway, that rant is all over the place. If anybody wants to respond to that, I'll give you a shot before we move on.
I was just going to button out on your statement, Pete.
Yeah.
Yes, 60 days ago, there were way more news podcasts in the top 50 than there are today. And that's just another example of podcasts adjusting culturally, which is really a wonderful thing.
All right. I want to do a final round robin to see what have we missed. What can you predict today that you think will happen next year that would have meaning to an advertiser? And Tom, I know you've got something, so I'm going to start with you.
Well, I'm actually not a big predictor. I find it gets in the way of my day job work, trying to predict things. But the one thing I will say is I think you're going to see, the things like the recent deal with, with Acast and Wonder Media, right? I think you're going to see some more of those kinds of things because ultimately, if you take the same ad and put it in a podcast under the same circumstances, put it on the radio under the same circumstances, let's say spot load, all of that being set to equal, an ad's an ad. And we are not going to be able to drive revenue effectiveness and CPMs in podcasting if we have crappy ads. And I think creative services is going to be increasingly a big part of, we know what to do to make a good ad. We have to start really focusing on that because there's a lot of crap on podcasts right now, and it's not helping. And we may not be at 18 or 20 units an hour like AM/FM radio is, but we are closer to that magic awful break point than we are further from it, whatever it may be. And it's really up to us to maintain quality and to take leadership in that. So I think that's going to play a role, and I think hopefully it drives effectiveness and it drives results.
Tom, I want to respond to that. It reminds me of a project we're actually working on right now. There's a brand that wants to modernize their campaign. They've been doing a lot of old school radio tactics, and I think the common thinking is if you want to disrupt your old, like you want to get away from the old and move toward the new, right? And the pressure in the marketplace is to say, well, use AI and do the million ads or, frequency ads or, all great businesses, all great models. But I think that what people think is if we just had more permutations that said something different according to the audience profile, then everything will get better. And I do think when a singer comes to your town at a concert and says, hello, Houston, like, yeah, I think that has some incremental value. I think that's fine. But I actually believe the opportunity for the brand is to do the thing that is the least efficient because it will be the most effective, and that personalization should not be thought of to have the most impact by how technical it can be done, but how inefficiently it can be done by a human being actually telling an honest story about their own experience and who they trust. And if we can get the personalization unlocked in podcasting the way we know it can be, but is decreasingly done at scale, I think that's where the bigger unlock is for the advertiser. I think that's where most of the value is in this channel for a brand. And the gravity is pulling us toward everything but that, would be my point of view. Pete, you want to go next?
Yeah, I'd say I think it's going to be an even better year for brands in 2025 than it was, in 2024. I think Spotify is going to allow measurement on Spotify video and buck the trend. I will predict that, which I think would be massive for brands who simply want to measure what they're buying. In addition, also still in the measurement lane, I think the integrations with, I think audio measurement is going to improve twofold. One, I think incrementality will continue to become more convincing, where brands can look at, an incrementality report in a silo without feeding the data into an MTA platform or their MMM and all these things. And they can say, okay, this is believable. This is giving us a holistic picture of podcasting. So it's out there now. I think there's more work to be done to make it more convincing, more applicable, and more scenarios. So that's going to improve. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I think the data integrations to these MTAs and MMMs and all these internal platforms that brands use to convince themselves whether something is working or not, those integrations will get stronger in a lot of ways. And I think there will be more integration with the data in audio, such that, say, they want to know what is our overlap between CTV and podcasting, which households are we reaching on each, and what is the overlap. So I think as the data becomes better integrated, there will be a lot more. I think buyers will become even more comfortable doing it. And maybe a bit of that is, the illusion of precision that they get, but I think it'll probably be a bit of that. But, if that's what they need to make them feel more comfortable with some of the fuzzier things of audio that we know, since we know audio works so well in so many cases, maybe that's just what's needed.
Very good. Stephen, final thoughts.
Sure. The first one, I may be a little late on this, but I believe two large podcast agencies are going to merge. But the next one is not a prediction. It's actually a wish, a desire. I think it's something we should be focusing on as an industry. Only 5% of podcast listening is in the car. That's ridiculous. That's crazy. That's a magnificent opportunity. And if you're using CarPlay and Android, it's only 7%. So it doesn't jump up as much as I would have guessed or hoped. And so I think as an industry, we should be focusing and teaching people how to listen to podcasts in the car. I think that will possibly have more impact than any other place, because it is so underutilized and such a logical place for podcast listening, audio podcast listening.
Well, I'll round you out here and underscore it. I think it is time for Talk Radio 2.0. I think that we need more advocacy for the importance of audio only. It is a constraint on the medium that produces a different type of output that is beautiful and wonderful and allows us to have conversations like what we're having here that other channels just don't allow for. Video optional, right? And I think that's what we have to continue to fight for. That is the thing that bonds us together as an industry, and I think we need to talk about it more. I'll make one more prediction and just say that I think we need to see more ancillary revenue and ancillary revenue streams being played with. I think that more merch for creators. I think that there's no database as a part of doing a show. You make a podcast, you make a show, you have an audience, but you really don't have permission to talk to them very directly outside of your show. And I think the more we can lower that barrier, which I think some of our other constraints are going to force, the more you're going to see people actually building businesses that can have a better flow of services and products and money between an audience and a creator. I just don't think we're good at it yet, but it's a big opportunity, and I think now's a good time to see that stuff starting to expand out. So farewell to this group, who have all been very generous for the last 90 minutes. Tom Webster, Pete Birsinger, Stephen Goldstein, 3 beyond luminaries. I'm so illuminated. I'm glowing right now, and you guys have really, really gone deep on this. So thank you for being so generous with your time and points of view. This has been a fun conversation, and we'll see if we're right in a year. So stay tuned.
Pleasure. Thank you.
2025, here we come. Special thanks to all of my panelists, Stephen, Tom, Pete, and thank you, dear listener, for all the time you've given us this year. We want to keep hearing from you. If you have predictions for 2025, info@mediaroundtable.com. Do you have suggestions for how we can do a better podcast? info@mediaroundtable.com. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and to use your influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain but edify, like the 3 folks you just heard on this program. If you're a marketer and you want to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, go to oxfordroad.com, subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Also, Ad Infinitum is our creative-focused podcast hosted by Stu Redwine. Make sure you check out Ad Infinitum. Final thank you to not only our guests, but Caitlin, Haley, Bianca, Kyle, Ezra, Mary Jane, Everett, Neil, and the team at Podcast One. It takes a village to do this podcast, everybody. So influence responsibly.